Once upon a time, there was a boy named Peter Johnson. He was in the 3rd grade at Lincoln School and was always behind in English, math, and even music. "I'll make it," he'd say at the end of the 1st quarter. "I'll catch up in the 2nd quarter." And when the 2nd quarter came, he hoped for the 3rd, so he was late and lagging behind, and he didn't worry. "I'll get there in time, and I'll get there in time." Then one day, Peter Johnson came to school, late as always. He ran into the locker room, threw his backpack on the bench, and shouted, "Mrs. Miller, get my coat." And Mrs. Miller asks from somewhere behind the hangers, "Who's calling me?" "It's me, Peter Johnson," replies the boy. "Why do you sound so hoarse today?" Mrs. Miller asks. "I'm surprised myself," replies Peter. "Suddenly I'm hoarse, all of a sudden." Mrs. Miller came out from behind the hangers, looked at Peter, and shrieked, "Oh!" Peter Johnson was frightened too and asked, "Mrs. Miller, what's the matter with you?" "What's the matter?" she answers. "You say you're Peter Johnson, but you must be his grandfather." "What kind of grandfather am I?" asks the boy. "I'm Peter, a 3rd grader." "Look in the mirror," says Mrs. Miller. The boy looked in the mirror and almost fell down. Peter Johnson saw that he had become a tall, thin, pale old man. His beard and mustache had grown, and wrinkles covered his face. As Peter looked at himself, his gray beard shook. He shouted in his bass voice, "Mommy," and ran out of the school. As he ran, he thought, "Well, if my mother doesn't recognize me, then all is lost." Peter ran home and rang the bell 3 times. Mom opens the door. She looks at Peter and doesn't say a word, and Peter doesn't say a word, standing there with his gray beard out and almost crying. "Who do you want, sir?" Mom finally asked. "Don't you recognize me?" Peter whispered. "I'm sorry, no," said his mother. Poor Peter turned away and walked away. As he walked, he thought, "What a lonely, miserable old man I am. No mother, no children, no grandchildren, no friends. And most importantly, I haven't had time to learn anything. Real old people are either doctors, masters, scientists, or teachers. And who needs me when I'm just a 3rd grader? They won't even give me a pension. I've only been working for 3 years. And how did I work? For D's and C's. What will happen to me? I'm a poor old man. I'm a poor boy. How will it all end?" So Peter thought and walked and thought, and did not notice how he went out of the city and into the forest. And he walked through the forest until it got dark. It would be good to rest, thought Peter, and suddenly saw that in the side, behind the trees, a white house. Peter went into the house, and there were no owners. There was a table in the middle of the room. Above it hangs a kerosene lamp. There are 4 stools around the table, a clock ticking on the wall, and in the corner there is a mountain of hay. Peter lay down in the hay, buried himself deep in it, got warm, cried quietly, wiped his tears with his beard, and fell asleep. Peter wakes up. It's light in the room. The lamp is burning under the glass, and there are 2 boys and 2 girls sitting around the table. Big bills are lying in front of them. The boys are counting and muttering, 2 years and 5 more and 7 more and 3 more. These are for you, Mr. Smith, and these are yours, Mrs. Jones, and these are yours, Miss Brown, and these are yours, Mr. Williams. Who are these boys? Why are they so glum? Why do they grunt and sigh like real old men? Why do they call each other by their first and last names? Why are they gathered here at night in a lonely cabin in the woods? Peter Johnson froze, not breathing. catching every word. And he was frightened by what he heard. Not boys and girls, but evil wizards and sorceresses were sitting at the table. That's how it works in the world. A person who wastes time in vain does not notice how he grows old. And the evil wizards found out about it and began to catch the guys wasting time. And so the wizards caught Peter Johnson and another boy and 2 girls and turned them into old men. The poor children grew old and did not notice it themselves. After all, a person who wastes time in vain does not notice how he grows old. And the time lost by the children was taken away by the wizards. And the wizards became little guys, and the children became old men. What to do? What to do? Can't we give the children back their lost youth? The wizards counted the time and wanted to hide the accounts in the table, but Mr. Smith, the chief of them, did not allow it. He took the bills and went to the clock. He turned the hands, listened to the ticking of the pendulum, and clicked on the clock again. He counted and whispered until the clock struck midnight. Then Mr. Smith mixed the knuckles and checked his calculations once more. Then he called the wizards to him and spoke softly. "Fellow wizards, know that the boys whom we have turned into old men today can still become younger." "How?" shrieked the wizards. "I'll tell you now," replied Mr. Smith. He tiptoed out of the cottage, walked around it, came back, bolted the door, and turned the hay with a stick. Peter Johnson froze like a mouse, but the lamp shone dimly, and the evil wizard did not see Peter. He called the other wizards closer to him and spoke softly. "Unfortunately, this is the way the world works. From any misfortune can be saved by a man. If the children whom we have turned into old men find each other tomorrow, come here to us at midnight and turn the hands of the clock back 77 circles. The children will become children again, and we will perish." There was silence among the wizards. Then Mrs. Jones said, "How would they know all this?" And Mr. Williams muttered, "They won't be here by midnight. They'll be a minute late." And Miss Brown muttered, "Where can they be? Those lazy fellows can't count to 77. They'll get it wrong." "That's so," said Mr. Smith. "But be on your guard. If they get to the clock and touch the hands, we'll never move. But in the meantime, there's no time to waste. Let's go to work." And the wizards, having hidden their bills in the table, ran like children, but at the same time grunting and sighing like real old men. Peter Johnson waited until the footsteps were silent in the woods. He got out of the cabin and, without wasting time, hiding behind trees and bushes, ran into town to look for the old schoolboys. The town had not woken up yet. It was dark in the windows, empty in the streets. Only the police stood at their posts. But then dawn broke. The first streetcars rumbled by. And at last Peter Johnson saw an old woman with a big basket walking leisurely down the street. Peter ran up to her and asked her, "Please tell me, Grandma, are you not a schoolgirl?" And the old woman liked tapping her feet and like swinging at Peter with the basket. Peter barely got away. He breathed a little and went on his way. And the city has already woken up. Streetcars are running. People are hurrying to work. Trucks are humming. They need to deliver goods to stores, factories, railroads. Wipers clean the sidewalks. Sprinkle them with sand so that pedestrians do not slip, do not fall, do not waste time. How many times Peter Johnson saw all this and only now realized why people are so afraid of not having time, being late, falling behind. Peter looks around looking for old men, but finds no one suitable. There are old men running along the streets, but you can see at once. Real ones, not third graders. Here's an old man with a briefcase, probably a teacher. Here is an old man with a bucket and a brush. a painter. Here rushes a red fire truck, and in it, an old man, the chief of the fire department of the city. This one, of course, has never wasted time in his life. Peter walks, wanders, and young old men, old children. There is no one. Life is boiling around him. Only he, Peter, lagged behind, was late, had no time, was good for nothing. Nobody needed him. Exactly at noon, Peter went into a small park and sat down on a bench to rest. Suddenly, he jumped up. He saw an old woman sitting not far away on another bench, crying. Peter wanted to run up to her, but did not dare. "I'll wait," he said to himself. "I'll see what she'll do next." And the old woman stopped crying and sat there, twiddling her thumbs. Then she took out a newspaper from her pocket and a piece of raisin bun from another. The old woman unfolded the newspaper, and Peter gasped with joy. "Children's newspaper." And the old woman began to read and eat. She picks out the raisins but doesn't touch the bun itself. When the old woman finished reading, she hid the newspaper and the bun and suddenly saw something in the snow. She bent down and grabbed the ball. Probably one of the children playing in the park had lost the ball in the snow. The old woman looked at the ball from all sides, wiped it with her handkerchief, stood up, went to the tree, and began to play ball. Peter rushed to her through the snow, through the bushes. He runs and screams. "Grandma, honestly, you're a schoolgirl." The old woman jumped with joy, grabbed Peter's hands, and answered, That's right. I'm third-grade student Mary Peterson. And who are you?" Peter told Mary who he was, so they held hands and ran off to find the rest of their friends. They searched for an hour, another hour, another hour, another hour. Finally, they came to the yard of a big house, and they see an old woman jumping behind the barn. She drew classics on the asphalt with chalk and hops on one leg, chasing a pebble. Peter and Mary rushed to her. "Grandma, are you a schoolgirl?" "Schoolgirl," answers the old lady, "Nancy Smith's third-grade classmate." "And who are you?" Peter and Mary told her who they were. The three of them held hands and ran to find their last friend. But he'd vanished into thin air. Wherever the old men went, and in yards, and in parks, and in children's theaters, and in the cinema, and in the museum, the boy disappeared. And that's it. And time goes on. It's already getting dark, and the windows of the houses lit up. The day is ending. What to do? Is it all gone? Suddenly Mary cried out, "Look, look!" Peter and Nancy looked, and this is what they saw. There's a streetcar, number 9, and there's an old man hanging on the back platform, with his hat pulled down over his ear and his beard waving in the wind. The old man is riding and whistling. His comrades are looking for him, and he's riding all over the city and thinking about nothing. The boys rushed after the streetcar. Luckily for them, the red light came on at the crossroads, and the streetcar stopped. The boys grabbed the old man by the hips and pulled him off the streetcar. "Are you a schoolboy?" they asked. "Of course I am," he replies. "Second-grade student Billy Brown. What do you want?" The boys told him who they were. In order not to waste time, all 4 of them got on the streetcar and drove out of town to the forest. Some school kids were on the same streetcar. They got up and gave our old men a seat. "Please sit down, grandfathers and grandmothers." The old people were embarrassed, blushed, and refused, and the school children begged them, persuade them. "Please sit down. You have worked hard for your long life. You are tired. Now sit down and rest." Luckily, the streetcar came to the forest. Our old men jumped off and ran into the thicket. But here a new trouble was waiting for them. They got lost in the forest. The night came, dark and dark. The old men wandered through the forest, falling, stumbling, but they couldn't find their way. "Ah, time, says Peter. It's running. Yesterday, I didn't see the way back to the cabin. I was afraid of wasting time, but now I see that sometimes it's better to waste a little time to save it later." The old people were completely exhausted, but to their luck, the wind blew, the sky cleared of clouds, and the full moon shone in the sky. Peter Johnson climbed up a tree and saw, there it was, the house, 2 steps away, its white walls, windows shining among the dense trees. Peter climbed down and whispered to his companions, "Hush! Not a word. Follow me." The boys crept up through the snow to the cabin. They peeked cautiously through the window. The clock reads 5 minutes to 12. The wizards are lying in the hay, saving the stolen time. "They're asleep," said Mary. "Hush," whispered Peter. Quietly, the boys opened the door and crawled to the clock. At 1 minute to 12, they stood by the clock. At exactly midnight, Peter reached out his hand to the hands and 1, 2, 3 turned them back counterclockwise. With a shout, the wizards jumped up, but they could not move. They stood there and grew old. They turned into adults. Gray hair shone on their temples. Their faces were covered with wrinkles. "Lift me up," Peter shouted. "I'm getting small. I can't reach the hands. 31, 32, 33. Peter's comrades lifted him up in their arms. On the 40th turn of the arrow, the wizards became decrepit old men. Closer and closer to the ground, lower and lower they became. And on the 77th and last turn of the arrows, the evil wizards cried out and disappeared, as if they had never existed. The boys looked at each other and laughed with joy. They became children again. With a fight they took, by a miracle they regained the lost time. They were saved, but remember, a man who wastes time in vain does not notice how he grows old.